Can you guys see the DHS logo?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. So we always like to talk about the mission of the Division of Developmental Disabilities, which is to ensure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have equal opportunities and receive the services and supports they need to live and work in South Dakota communities. So we're going to talk about 3 sections today. Well, it's more than 3 sections of the ICAP, but the first one being the problem behavior section. And I think it's always important for us to preface that behaviors are things that we can observe, so that they're the actions or events that we can actually see and that we can measure, and that they are often repeated and can be repeated. We also know that behavior is a form of the communication that individual is giving to us. And we also know that we have our own behaviors that we will demonstrate. And even though we're able to probably distinguish with words what we're communicating, sometimes our actions also will tell others what we're trying to let them know. Okay, so the next, so talking about problem behaviors in relation to the ICAP and whether or not they are a problem behavior is whether or not they are interfering with that person's independence and living their life and living and being able to participate in the activities that they do every day. So if that behavior is something that hinders that, then we know that it is a problem behavior for them. We also know that it can, when they elicit this behavior, it's a problem behavior when it's interfering with others that are in their environment. So whatever behavior the individual is doing is causing the other person or other persons to maybe not do what they want to do because of it. Also, when speaking about problem behaviors and on the ICAP, we need to always make sure that when we call it a problem behavior, that it requires that somebody is needing a staff or somebody's needing to intervene to make sure that that behavior stops or minimizes. If the individual, for example, will stop the behavior on their own, that isn't necessarily considered a problem behavior in relation to the ICAP. So the scoring considerations for problem behavior section is we have to always be mindful of the rights of people. We know that individuals we all have rights, and even though a person with an intellectual or developmental disability might be in our services, we have to be mindful of their rights. We have to be mindful that sometimes a behavior is a response to some type of medical situation going on. A medical concern could be happening for that individual, and we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful of the fact that the way the individual is interacting with their environment, it might be a response to that. We know that all people, including those with an intellectual or developmental disability, have traumas that they have come into contact or that they're living through now, that they're dealing with now from their past. And again, we know that we can't limit a person's rights and not expect that not to be, that if we limit their rights, it's not going to be manifested in a problem behavior. We also know that it can be difficult not to be subjective when scoring problem behaviors on the ICAP. Some people will often interject their own biases and values and maybe consider that a problem behavior when it isn't necessarily a problem behavior for the general population. So we know there's subjectivity. That's why we have the division has outlined the ICAP guidelines to be a reference to help when scoring. We have to realize that it's difficult when there are societal norms and expectations. So for example, and I think this can talk about this item, this bullet point, but also the one following it, that if an individual is using foul language or curse words, just because they're doing that doesn't mean it's a problem behavior. And if they're demonstrating that foul language or vulgar language in something like a bar setting or a bowling alley amongst peers, it's not necessarily a problem behavior. Now, however, if they're at church and they're doing that in front of children or people at the church setting, that's not necessarily the appropriate place for that behavior. So being able to look at that through that lens is appropriate. So there are 8 categories within the problem behavior section. And when looking at the ICAP booklet, you know that the booklet is in like an off-white and a maroon rust color. And so each of those sections, the rust color will tell you some examples of that particular behavior. If you're in the gray or in a black and white copy, it's a kind of more of a gray section that'll give you those examples. So when you're working through the categories, if we're looking for a score, we're looking to score it based on how we're looking at the behavior that causes the most interference with their daily activities. And that's the primary problem behavior. So we can recognize that some individuals might have more than one behavior in each category. But we're looking for the one that's causing the most problematic behaviors. And that's the one we're going to write on the line, and that's the behavior we're going to score. So, for example, in hurtful to self, if an individual is biting themselves or is banging their head against a wall, those are both self-injurious behaviors. Which is the one that's causing the most interference for their daily activities? That's the one we're going to write on the line, and that's the behavior we're going to score. If a person doesn't have any behaviors in that category, then we would write none on the line A for primary problem behavior, and we would be marking zeros for frequency and severity. The examples that are listed for each section are not all inclusive, so there are just some ideas of what you could be able to consider in those categories. There might be others though. So the first category is hurtful to self, and that is when they are physically injuring their own body. And I'm saying physically because this is not the category for somebody who has suicidal ideations or threatens self-harm. This is when there's an actual physical injury done to their body. And remembering that it always needs to require immediate medical intervention and or immediate staff intervention. So if one of those isn't occurring, then we wouldn't be considering it a problem behavior. Remember, that key part is that it's requiring some type of intervention in order to stop that behavior from occurring. So threats of self-harm would be better recorded in another category. This is only those with the physical injury. So, and these are just some examples. Again, there are more, but like they could consider hitting self, banging head, scratching, pinching, or pulling out their hair. Category number 2 is hurtful to others. So this is the physical act toward either another person that they're near or an animal. So it's not the threat of physical harm, it's the actual physical harm. It's again requiring somebody to intervene immediately, that usually being the staff that's present. And if we're talking about threats of physical harm, we would record that in another category. So this is just the physical act, which could look like, and here's some examples for you: hitting, kicking, biting, pinching, pulling hair. Again, not an all-inclusive list. There are other items. Okay, category number 3 is destructive to property. And this is when there's a deliberate act to break something, deface something, destroy some property, either theirs or somebody else's or the provider's property. So they're that physical act of doing it. Now, if they're just threatening to do something, like they're threatening to burn something, now that would be included in a different category. This is when they actually commit the destruction. So some examples would be tearing of items, cutting something, throwing, or burning. The fourth category is disruptive behavior. So this behavior is whatever the individual that we're scoring is having a behavior, it is interfering with what others are trying to do. So others' activities are impeded by this. So it's interfering and limiting also the person's opportunity to participate in daily activities. So it's not only disruptive to others, it could be disruptive to themselves or both. Some examples of that are pestering others, teasing somebody, arguing, or picking fights. Again, not all inclusive. There are other behaviors. Number 5 is the unusual or repetitive habits. These are behaviors that are done often over and over again. So they're excessive usually. They're, like I said, repetitive and are occurring often over and over, and they're not necessarily those usual actions that people will see. So they're a little bit unusual or can be unusual. Remembering that if they're doing this behavior, that's not letting them do other daily activities. So it's interfering for them. And what should be here also is it's requiring some intervention in order to stop it from happening. Some of the behaviors that we could consider in this category are rocking, sucking on their hands, pacing. But again, there are more that you would consider in this category. Category number 6 is the socially offensive behavior. Again, offensive to other people. Behaviors that for most people, not all, but most people in a similar situation or environment are considered offensive. So a similar situation or environment. So, for example, we would have, and it's requiring that intervention to diminish the behavior, to have it quit, to have it stop. So touching others too much, swearing at somebody, standing too close, threatening somebody. So threatening of physical harm or threatening of destruction of property might be in this one. There are other examples. Urinating in inappropriate places might be considered in this section. Number 7 is withdrawal or inattentive behavior, and that's when a person has difficulty being around others or paying attention. So usually the individual is not interested in their daily activities, daily tasks, and those are the things that they usually enjoy doing. The person might be showing us their motivation is lessened. They might not be experiencing pleasure in things they normally do. They don't necessarily want to interact with other people. They have a difficult time focusing on a task or paying attention to when others are around them or talking to them. It is important to note that suicidal ideation could be considered in this category. So I think of this, it's hard on this one because we have to make sure we understand it's not like what everybody thinks a person should be doing. So like if for me, an example would be I enjoy reading. And so if I stopped reading, that would probably be an indication that maybe I'm becoming withdrawn. But items that I don't necessarily enjoy doing, like running, if I don't want to run, that's not necessarily an indication that I'm becoming withdrawal or having an inattentive behavior. So number 8 is uncooperative behavior. And that is when somebody is just being uncooperative. So they're not wanting to follow the laws or rules, some of those expectations that society has put on us. I say reasonable requests because they have to be reasonable, not something outlandish. This might be seen as somebody that is being stubborn or contrary, and they might be having difficulty working with others or taking redirection. Now, again, this requires the intervention to stop. And we have to be mindful that people have the right to not want to do something. So, or they have the right to not choose to follow it when wanting. So I think about like if somebody is being asked to shower in the morning, but they really don't like showering in the morning, but they'll do it at maybe at nights, they're not necessarily being uncooperative because that is their right to choose that. So some of the things that you might find in this section, you could include like cheating or stealing. You might, if they're always late for their work assignment or something like that. All right, so again, back to that scoring of that behavior, we know that we're looking to look at more data if possible for that individual. So over the past 12 months would be a good time to be able to see if that behavior is showing itself. So one of the things that we would give guidance on is that it wouldn't be appropriate to rate the behavior based on an assumption that if you stopped providing some type of behavioral supports or structure, that behavior would happen. So we're looking for the data to support that it does happen. So we can't assume that, oh, if I took this away, this is the behavior that would happen. Can't make that assumption. When we're talking about scoring for frequency, we're asking the question, how often does this behavior usually occur? So we would want to look at the actual numbers of times that the person might have that behavior, and then we would try to determine an average. We might look at 3 months, and then if we can't establish it in 3 months, we might need to go up to 12 months to look at that behavior. We know sometimes that looking at behavior over a longer period of time addresses the ebb and flow that they might see throughout the year. Some people might have a frequency of a behavior more often in the spring rather than in the fall, based on what's going on. Sometimes we have this low frequency, high severity behaviors, and this can cause us some issues because we know that the person exhibits the behavior, and because the structure or the behavior support plan, something interventions are put in place, then the frequency tends to lessen, but the severity of that behavior, if it does occur, is relatively high. So what we're looking at is scoring it based on if there's still that history or pattern of the high risk behavior. So I use arson as an example, which is quite the one to use. But thankfully, if this person is known to have arson behavior in their past, there's some structure, some behavior support, some restrictions put in place that wouldn't allow that to happen because of what would happen if it did. So we know that it happens less often because we have these structures in place, but we see that there's still that pattern for that high risk behavior. And I use arson because we might see that person still want have an obsession with matches or lighters. And so we're paying attention to those smaller indications. One might say that that behavior or trend is still relatively there. Again, we might be looking at this for over a 12-month span. So when the ISP is looking at updating the ICAP or completing an ICAP, they're establishing as a group whether those patterns still exist. They're still showing tendencies for it. And then, of course, through a functional assessment, there is the theories that the information that comes out of that, which would be included in the behavior support plan. And one of the things that the ISP team needs to decide is if the individual has learned skills that help them not show that behavior or not have that behavior, rather than just not dealing with it altogether. But they might have learned some skills that do help them. So severity is, we ask ourselves the question of how serious is the problem usually caused by the behavior. So we're choosing one response to answer for that one. And it's on severity on that behavior in the environment in which it's most often happening, observed and addressed. So For example, if we're talking about arson, which hopefully we're not having that, but so we're going to look at how severe that behavior is, and we know that it happens most often in their residential setting. So I'm going to score based on that setting rather than where it's not happening as often. And we have set out the guidelines. And so in order, we're going to look at those here in a minute. In order to establish that severity, it has to have all of the criteria met that are established in the guidelines. So the guidelines show us that if a 0 or not serious, not a problem is chosen, that is, it's important to note that if the rate of the behavior for severity would be a 0, regardless, like how often that behavior, how frequent the behavior is, the severity of it would not be very severe. We wouldn't consider that a problem behavior, so it wouldn't be listed because it's not considered a problem behavior. And we would write it as 0 if not everybody on the ISP team or that's involved would consider it to be a problem for that individual. The next one is slightly serious, a mild problem. Again, all of these criteria must be met in order to mark the 1 in the severity section. So the specific problem behavior we're scoring, it's considered to be a problem, but it's usually only in one environment. So it's usually like only happening either in the residential setting or in where they're working, one or the other. It's not necessarily happening in both places. We would say it's slightly serious if intervention or redirection is provided when the behavior occurs. So just some intervention or redirection is needed. We would say it's slightly serious if it's an unwritten, informal plan or of supports, or some routine support that person receives. It's not formalized. That the staff that work with that individual they're aware of what goes on with this individual, and so they know how to work with them, and they know it's appropriate. And I think it's also important to note that this behavior can be managed with common sense rather than an extensive plan or structured environment. So number 2 would be considered a moderately serious or a moderate problem. Again, in order to receive this score, they would have to have all of these items for that specific behavior. So it's occurring in more than one environment, that problem behavior. Of course, we need intervention or redirection to halt the behavior from continuing. We've now needed to address this behavior in a formal written procedure that is helping that individual to gain some skills so that they can decrease that targeted behavior. And then our goal is for them to learn some replacement behaviors. It's important to note that all the behavior, in order to mark number 2, that we understand the behavior and we can see that it's documented and monitored. There might be some type of an incident report or some type of narrative that's describing that behavior, but it would support that it's occurring. So number 3, of course, getting a little bit more diligent on the documentation. So we would need all of these to be able to demonstrate F3 for very serious or severe problem. So there is approved behavior support plan, and they could have both, or they have a rights restriction that is in place. It's formally written procedure that helps the individual gain skills, that helps them learn replacement behaviors that are meant to address and decrease the target behavior. This behavior, of course, is documented and monitored, looking at frequency and severity of each occurrence. We know that the frequency of the behavior only reduces based on having that structured, highly structured environment and having some staff that are vigilant about keeping tabs on it. And that the paid staff have a difficult time, even though they're trained, but they have a difficult time to support that person when they are having this behavior. They're not easily redirected, they tend to be harmful to others, and sometimes physical restraint is needed to decrease the behavior. Number 4, which would make it extremely serious, would be a critical problem, is all of these would need to be documented, that they have the grave or immediate threats to the life of themselves or others in the vicinity. It's requiring that immediate intervention. There might be some criminal charges that might be put in place as a result of this behavior, that they have a formalized behavior support plan and rights restriction, and or that is helping them to gain some skills, learn some replacement behaviors that target the decrease of the targeted behavior. It's documented and monitored both frequency and severity. The behavior for those as a community support provider would need to have submission of a CIR or critical incident report to the Division of Developmental Disabilities. But for SCDC, you might have that in a different type of incident report. It is difficult once the person's actions, it's difficult to stop the consequences, and that might result in some type of jeopardizing of their services. It is in essence essential to have a highly structured environment with that 24-hour supervision that for staff that's trained to be able to support this person. So I gave an example here. So in the hurtful to self, this person doesn't have any behaviors to be scored in that. So none was written on the line, and 0 for never and not serious, not a problem, were marked. However, in the hurtful to others, the team decided that shoving is the most problematic behavior for this individual. So shoving is written on the line, and they've decided through documentation that 1 to 3 times a month this occurs. And then when it does occur, it's very serious. It's a severe problem, and they can provide this documentation, which we already went through, but I wanted to show it again. All of these would be able to be demonstrated for that individual for that specific problem. So they'd have a behavior support plan that's approved. They might have rights restriction. Remember, we're looking to develop their skills and replacement behaviors to make sure it's addressing that target behavior. We're able to show that the frequency and severity are documented, and that the frequency and severity is only reduced within a structured environment with constant staff vigilance, and that it's often difficult for the trained staff to be able to de-escalate the behavior without other staff or possibly some type of restraint. So on a behavior support plan, this was just included to show that on the ICAP it says shoving, so I should see that in the behavior support plan. I should be able to see the clear delineation from the behavior, the problem behavior, to what's being done to help that individual learn skills. This was just another example for destructive to property. This individual often rips clothing, so that was put as the primary behavior. Again, they were happening 1 to 3 times a month, and they could document it up to and follow all those bullet points for very serious, a severe problem. Again, seeing it in a behavior support plan, that destruction of property was the ripping of clothes, and so there should be some replacement skills in the behavior support plan to address that. This is just an example of collecting data for the 2 areas. They have the physical aggression and the property destruction, and the counts. We can see that it's happening twice in this time frame for both those behaviors. So as part of the guidelines and some information that's being provided to community support providers and case management, and just as reference to SCDC, this is the documentation that would need to be submitted to provide support that that behavior is occurring, especially if the CSPs are needing to submit for rate tier changes. This is the items that might be showing the documentation. All right, so the next section on the ICAP would be the residential placement. And we know that there are two columns. So there's the current residence where you're only one statement or one area is being marked, and that's where they're currently residing. And then number two would be, the second column would be the recommended change that the team is hoping to see for that individual in the next 2 years. So what best describes that? And the team has some type of assessment that they've done to ascertain whether that person needs change in their residential setting. And it's a recommendation, and it's reflected in their ISP goals and supports that's what they're working towards. However, you might find that they have the same type, and so, or they might, there's also the no change recommended at the bottom. So if the same is the same type of residential setting, you could mark it in both columns. So the first one is with them living with their parents or relatives. This is usually like a child or an adult that's 10. Well, for children, of course, they live with their parents, and this might be an adult in like the community setting that's living at home, or it could be opposite. The parents might be living with their son or daughter. They're usually considered the head of household or the spouse. Or, I'm sorry, if they're usually the one that's the head of household or the spouse of the head of household, that would be in the more chosen in the more independent sections like 3 and 4. Foster home, of course, is number 2, is if the individual is living in the family home of somebody that is a non-relative, and that it would be licensed by DOH and DSS, or DSS, not DHS. Should be DOH or DSS. Independent in their own home or rental unit is number 3. So this is for individuals who receive less than 1 contact per week from the residential service staff. So they're not receiving it once a week, every week. They might be considered the head of household. They're not receiving supervision every day, day to day. It's also important to note that this is not a setting that is owned or operated by one of the provider agencies in the state. Number 4 is independent with regular home-based services or monitoring. So this would be chosen for an individual who's able to maintain a home on their own, but does have some type of services that are given to them in their home, at least 1 contact per week. And if they didn't receive that, they wouldn't be able to live independently. Number 5 is room and board without personal care. So an individual that lives in a residential setting that receives sleeping, meals, and some type of supervision, but is not receiving any type of formal training while there, and they're not receiving any type help with their personal care either. So number 6 is semi-independent. This is for somebody that has supervisory staff in the building. So it's a residence that has that built in. So a person that lives there will need some type of services during their waking hours. A person would probably not be receiving any of the services and supports overnight. And if we were to align it with anything within what the Division of Developmental Disability offers, it would be in the choices supervised living. It is important to note that some of these services can be done through a virtual option. So number 7 is group residence with staff. And important to note here that a person living in this setting does need and does receive services and supports from some staff on a 24-hour daily situation. It aligns with within choices is consider one of our group homes, and that some of those services can be done through virtual options. A personal care facility, number 8, where they are living in this residential setting and staff are assisting with their dressing, getting dressed, helping them bathe, and then if there's other personal cares they need help with. However, they're not providing for any type of training for this individual, and they're not doing any types of nursing care. This would be aligned to something along the lines of assisted living settings. So then we have number 9, which is intermediate care nursing facility. In this setting, the individual would be living there if they don't require a 24-hour immediate nursing access. They do receive some types of daily nursing care, and this would be something along the lines of a nursing facility. And then number 10 would be skilled nursing facility, which would mean, again, this one does require, so a person living here requires 24-hour immediate nursing access. These are considered intensive services, and it would be aligned closely with a nursing facility. So state institution number 11 is operated by the state, this type of residential setting. And the care is often provided for 16 or more people at one time living in the same area. Number 12 is other, which would be something like a homeless shelter, motel, or prison, and you can write that on the line if that's the option you're choosing. The next one is daytime programming. Again, 2 columns for this one. We have the number 1 is current formal daytime activity, and you're able to choose one of those options. And then in column 2 would be what a recommended change would be within the next 2 years by the ISP team is making that decision. It's a change they're looking forward to and preparing that individual for. So there would be an assessment completed, and it would be in their ISP. It would be in their ISP goals possibly. And if it's the same type of program, but in a different site or location, you could still mark the same column. The same would be marked in that column 2 as it is in 1. The first choice would be no formal daily program outside the home. So the individual is not, or is receiving, is participating in daily activities, which would include occasional social and recreational type activities. But there is not a formal daytime habilitation program in occurring. Number 2 is regular volunteer activities that occur outside the home. So at least 1 day per week is this happening. So number 3 is school. And so on that line, you can write down what type of school it is, but it's for the individuals between the ages of 3 and 21 that are attending some type of educational program that has a certified teacher. Number 4 is daycare. And this is more of the program when a person attends programs for social and leisure, and it's usually for a preschool or elderly individual. Number 5 is a daytime activity center. So there's personal, social, and pre-vocational activities that could occur at the center. They're looking to acquire some skills when they attend there. They also might be looking to maintain or slow regression of skills that they have already gained. Looking to maximize any a life experience for them. So this would not include people who are, they would only be here if they're not participating in paid work activities, because they will not earn a wage at this location. It aligns closely with the choices day habilitation service can be provided in a community setting or a CSP if it cannot occur in their own home. So number 6 is work activity center. So this could be social and vocational training. So the person might be receiving services that help them obtain a job in the next 1 to 2 years. That's one of their goals. There would be a goal that would help them develop competitive work traits. There is the option, there is a possibility they're receiving a wage, or they may not be. Can be provided in a community setting and or at a community support provider, but it aligns very closely with our choices career exploration services. Number 7 is sheltered workshop. So they are, the individual, if attending this, is receiving services that help them to obtain a job the next year. So the goals of this setting is to help develop competitive worker traits. They would be doing something that would help them earn a wage, can be provided in the community, or it can be at a CSP, and it aligns with the choices career exploration setting. Also would be something in this case, they are attending and receiving services that enhance just their general person's employability. It's happening in a separate area away from their non-disabled peers and workers. It might earn a wage, and then it aligns with the Choices Group Supported Employment Enclave. So number 8, supervised or supported on-site job placement. So an individual that is attending this daytime program is obtaining or maintaining employment out in an integrated competitive site. They are receiving at least minimum wage for this. There may be some type of supervision or support that assists, and at least 1 contact with supported employment staff per week. And their groups can be no more than 4 if this is a group situation. Number 9 is competitive employment. This is for individuals who are able to hold a job. They are either full-time or part-time. They might be at minimum wage or above. They are receiving some types of level of benefits that are similar to other employees. They have the option to opportunity to interact with employees that do not have a disability, and they do have the option for, there might be some options for advancement. So the next section would be considered support services, and these are again in columns where you would mark all that apply in column 1 that are presently being used. And then if on column number 2, they're not actually being used at this time, but an evaluation might be needed. If this column number 2 is chosen, you would probably identify what evaluation is needed in order for that service to be accessed. And there's a line provided to be able to list that out. Of course, case management would be able to assist that individual when they need some medical, habilitative, social, employment, just types of related services that they might need or want. Number 3 is home-based services. So they're looking for when an individual is at home, or an integrated community setting, this might be appropriate to help teach different types of social living skills or help them enhance what they already have. The goal is outlined in the ISP for them, and it can align with the choices supported living. Specialized dental care, if when people are requiring annual dental care, this might be due to some type of physical condition or problem behavior that it has to be specialized. This there'd be a determined need for any type of general anesthesia. There might be sedative premedication or some other type of restraint. This could be considered a highly restrictive procedure, and it would need approval if it is by a behavior support committee or human rights committee every 6 months. Specialized medical care, which is number 5. So this is for individuals that are on a long-term or ongoing medical condition that requires visits to licensed specialists. Again, there might be the need for that general anesthesia, things like that, in order for this to be occurring. It might be considered highly restrictive. So if so, it would need approval of the Behavior Support Committee and Human Rights Committee every 6 months. So if it's a short-term condition, it wouldn't be in this category. Specialized nursing care, which is care that is performed by a registered nurse in any of the settings. It's not a routine nursing service. And we have some guidelines in the ICAP guidelines on page 12 through 13. It gives some ideas of what is considered routine and what is considered non-routine, so that you would know if that should be marked. Specialized mental health services is number 7. This could be provided by a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist for their behavioral or medication updates. This person could be, it could be used if it was for a mental health professional, and if it's happening more than just annually, a once a year visit. It's important to note that this isn't to be selected if it's for the evaluation only. So number 8 is specialized nutritional or dietary services. This is an ongoing service that's scheduled. Some type of evaluation has taken place and has recommended this. It might be something like the modification of their food consistency. Now, if it has something to do with a routine annual assessment of their dietary needs, just like as if somebody's needing to go in to have their weight checked, that would be included in this section. Therapies for number 9, which would be like your occupational, physical, or speech therapy. It is approved by one of the people licensed. It's ongoing. There should be an ongoing condition that you're working through. A paraprofessional may be utilized if they're supervised by an OT, PT, or speech path. And this is, again, not for when evaluation is occurring. It's for the ongoing services. Number 10 is respite care. That's when we need to aid the caretaker or parent. It's a short-term service. If the caretaker is in need of some type of relief. So number 11, specialized transportation services. So if the person through some type of assessment they need specialized or more accessible transportation. This would not include the use of a provider-owned van. And number 12 is vocational evaluation. It's when an evaluation or assessment is performed to help determine what types of supports that individual might need. It might be specific for vocational interests and employment. Other is an option. This might be used for people who need substance abuse treatments or things like that, or other supports throughout community organizations. It does not include utilizing treatment services if they're just receiving an evaluation only. All right, this last section is social and leisure activities, and you're able to mark all that apply for the first section, which is happening within the last month. That's, for example, these could be formal or informal, talking to family, visiting with friends, going shopping, attending outside social and recreational activity, engaging in hobbies or personal leisure. And there's an option for other. And then there's also the second one, which is factors that limit those social activities. You're supposed to choose all that apply. So it's what can limit them having these desired social time. That's lack of interest, no one to accompany, lack of transportation, lack of money, health problem, behavior problem, or other is an option also. So with that being said, here is your contacts for us at the Division of Developmental Disabilities. If you have questions on completing an ICAP, you can reach out in these ways. For myself, Stephanie Boujon, or Heather Burden. And that is our training for today. Is there any questions that I can answer?
I don't have any.
I don't have any yet either. Thank you.
Okay.
Done here.
So, perfect. If you do, you certainly can reach out. And again, this will be, I'm going to save this out on the provider portal, and I will send the link so you know where to find it.
Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.